Just 4 years since becoming head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis's global popularity continues to grow, but so too do the controversies around him. The Pope's seemingly progressive positions on contentious issues such as divorce, abortion and homosexuality continue to spark heated debates within the Church. So, has man of the people Pope Francis gone too far? Or is a vocal minority of conservatives simply trying to undermine him? Joining me to debate this are Austen Ivereigh, the author of a biography on Pope Francis entitled The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope, and Matthew Schmitz, the literary editor of the influential religious magazine First Things. He wrote that the Pope has built his popularity at the expense of the church he leads. Thanks both for joining me in the arena. Matthew, let me begin with you. What is your main objection, your issue with Pope Francis, given how popular he is with both Catholics and non-Catholics alike? You wouldn't deny that, would you?
No, I mean, he remains very popular. We have seen a slight increase in people who positively don't like him. Here's the issue that many people have. I'm a young Catholic, Mehdi. I'm a convert to the church who knows it to be beautiful and true. And when Francis was elected, I celebrated that election. I thought he would make a wonderful pope. The reason I've come to change my mind is that I've seen that Francis is building his program of supposed reform at the expense not only of the church, but also at the expense of its most vulnerable members, the children who have been orphaned by the culture of divorce, remarriage that was left to us by the 1960s and the baby boomers. It's those children who are objecting to Pope Francis now.
Austen, it's not just the church that's suffering as a result of the Pope, it's children too.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, really ridiculous, given not only Pope Francis's passion for the family, his enthusiasm for restoring the family, lifelong fidelity in marriage. He called 2 synods so that the church might better enable not just Catholics, but the whole world to recover the value of marriage at a time when law and culture has lost the meaning of lifelong fidelity. So the notion that he's in some way caving in to the culture of modernity or individualism is really, really not only kind of wrong, but it's just grotesquely to misunderstand the papacy. And I think this is the difficulty of people like Matt, and I've read his stuff and I've seen how he's been turned off eventually by Pope Francis. What I read in what he says is that he has come to look at Pope Francis through, I think, the eyes of the American culture wars, and I think he's just got it wrong.
Okay, Matthew, isn't the problem here that the Pope and his supporters get that you have to move with the times, that trying to enforce conservative values in an increasingly liberal age is impossible? It's not a war you can win.
Is it an increasingly liberal age? Brexit, Trump, Viktor Orban, all these things would seem to militate against that idea. In my view, Francis is very much tied to an age, but it's an age that is currently passing. His papacy represents, to me and I think to many young Catholics, a revenge of the past, where a group of older cardinals who were very enthusiastic about the church in the 60s and 70s after the Second Vatican Council have now tried to reassert a discredited version of Catholicism and bring us back.
Austen, let me put this point to you. The Pope isn't a liberal, is he?
No, exactly. Well, this is what I'm just trying to say. I mean, both of you are talking here as if Pope Francis is some kind of liberal who's adapting the church to the modern age. He's not. He's reforming the church so that the church can better evangelize the modern world. And this idea that in some way he doesn't care about the children of divorced parents, he wants marriage to be lived in lifelong fidelity. This is all about the victims of divorce and enabling them to start again and live marriages. This is for the benefit of children. This is for the benefit of fidelity. And I say this is the problem. I mean, Matthew is looking at this through the eyes of this kind of contemporary idea that you either have to resist or surrender to the modern age. Pope Francis is coming from a continent, Latin America, which is predominantly poor and does not have in place the major institutions that we have in the rich world. And he's coming from a pastoral church that is very close to people in their suffering and in everything else. That's what he's bringing to the church.
Yes,
if I may.
Yes.
So, Austen, in your biography, which I read and richly enjoyed and recommended, you present him as a reformer. And I think that those who voted for him to be Pope wanted him to reform. But that program of reform has stalled, even if we don't look at this one issue of divorce. Francis has backed off in a major way his effort to clean up the Vatican's finances, basically giving victory to the corrupt, entrenched bureaucrats there.
Your magazine, Matthew, First Things, your magazine recently published a piece which began, "Is the Pope Catholic? It used to be an answer, not a question. Alas, it has become a question." Would you go that far yourself, Matthew? Would you question the Pope's commitment to Catholicism itself?
No, the Catholic Church is a very motley mix of people. It's not, there's no guarantee that someone who's Catholic is perfectly right all the time or perfectly moral all the time, but it is increasingly the case. So here's the question: what happens when the Pope builds his popularity by attacking established ways of expressing Catholic teaching, by shucking off all of the trappings of the office? Francis has increasingly removed himself from the dignities and the traditional formulas of the office, and that makes it harder for him to repel any criticism.
Well, I think here we're getting close to what really bothers Matthew. He wants the red shoes. He wants the popes to be carried on a seder just to talk. I mean, he wants a church which no longer exists, a church of the 1950s. The Pope is absolutely kept the dignity of the office, but he has brought the office of the papacy and the church close to the people. Physically, that's what he does all the time. The real reform of this Pope is in converting attitudes. An understanding that God is not just about truth and doctrine, but also about love and acceptance, and that is what deeply disturbs, I think, some people, particularly elites in America. Okay, Matthew, love and mercy. What's wrong with that?
Nothing at all. But what's necessary is a true love and a true mercy. The scriptures talk about where mercy and justice meet, and that's what we don't have in the church. There's been too much of what Catholics call kind of an antinomian impulse in Francis, a tendency to always suggest that the truth of the gospel and mercy is counter to the law. And this is a more Protestant idea. It's a more kind of radical Christian idea, and it's counter to the loving but all the same ritualistic nature of the Catholic Church. Great English anthropologist Mary Douglas, who I'm sure Austen knows, pointed out that it's very dangerous when the leaders of a ritualistic institution oppose themselves to ritual. They undermine the basis of their own authority.
Austen, let me ask you this. You mentioned US culture wars and said Matthew's seeing it through the prism of the US conservatives, US culture warriors. And yet, it's not just US conservatives who disagree with the Pope's leadership on a lot of this. You have African archbishops from South Africa, from Kenya. You have archbishops from Mexico and Venezuela, all writing to the Pope saying, what are you saying here? Clarify what you mean. Are you changing doctrine on divorce, on other such issues? They're not happy with him.
No. Oh, well, there are conservative bishops and cardinals, of course, across the world. It's not geographically specific, and yet the volume and the vehemence of the criticism which is coming from Catholic conservatives, particularly wealthy conservative lobbies in the United States, is just deafening.
I'm ready to cash my check, but no one's offering me great piles of money.
No, of course they're not, Matthew, but you would accept that, I mean, your magazine and many of these Catholic foundations are very well financed. They have blogs, they have websites.
It's equally true on both sides. Austen, it's a non sequitur, and you know it. It's true on both sides. It's true on both sides of the debate. To try to discredit conservatives as in someone's pocket is fundamentally dishonest.
I'm merely making the observation. I'm merely making the observation that when you look at where the criticism is coming from, the vehemence and the volume is much greater from the United States, from those sectors, than anywhere else in the world.
But it's not just the US.
But the critics of the conservatives are equally coming from the developed world, from London, from New York.
Well,
okay, Austen, finish your point.
I've just said conservative opponents are come from all over the place. But if you look
as do those on the other side, so your point is neither here nor there.
Okay, Austen, finish your point, and then I want to ask a follow-up.
My point is simply that the Pope has the overwhelming support of the world's bishops, and particularly those in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia.
How do you explain then their silence? Very few people often have defended.
Matthew, I will come back to you. Hold on, Matthew. Let Austen finish his point, and then I'll come back to you.
Do you mind if I just make this point? The Catholic Church now is predominantly a developing world church. It is a place of where the poor majority of the world live. And Pope Francis is increasingly reflecting the style, the temperament, the attitudes of the majority of the Catholics. And this is what needs to be understood by Matthew, who yearns for a particular kind of church, which frankly is very, very culturally and historically isolated and no longer exists.
But Austen, let me ask you this. Is the Pope, Austen, trying to have his cake and eat it? He makes these progressive, liberal-sounding noises, which win him hearts and minds, which win him... Well, they are liberal-sounding. I think a lot of liberals like him because they think he's a reformer. Well, hold on. Your book is called A Great Reformer. They think he's a reformer. And then he carries out a fundamentally conservative, traditionalist agenda. He backs a referendum in Slovakia to oppose gay people adopting children. So he
opposes gay adoption. He opposes gay marriage. He upholds Catholic teaching. There isn't a single
Are you telling me he doesn't give out the image of being different to liberals and people on the left? Are you seriously telling me that?
I think that's a good question.
Matthew.
Francis is called, in some quarters, the cool Pope. It's a joke among young leftists because he's trying to rebrand something that fundamentally cannot change. It'll be as successful as New Coke. Coca-Cola went back to the original formula.
Austen, let me ask you this. After the Pope goes, will it revert to what it was before? Will he leave? You know, we've seen Barack Obama followed by Donald Trump. Will Pope Francis be followed by a much more conservative traditionalist?
The answer is I don't know, because when the cardinals gather to elect the new pope, they read the signs of the times. There are all kinds of deliberations that go into that. But my own view is that the reforms which he has unleashed, which have a very, very broad consensus from the cardinals and the bishops across the church. Indeed, they mandated him to bring about those reforms, at least a lot of them. He is putting in place those reforms which will be continued by the next pope. I think actually the shift that Pope Francis has introduced, and I agree it is a significant shift, is not an adaptation to modernity. It is the recovery of a deeper tradition within the church, which sadly some people who have a particular idea of what the church and the pope should be simply don't recognize. Okay. And every pope builds on a predecessor. The next one will build on Francis.
We'll have to leave it there.
This is not, there is no rupture. There is no rupture.
Several times
Matthew,
you
last
said
word,
that,
very briefly.
Yes, thank you. That young Catholics want to go back to some forgotten version of the church. I think it's actually Francis who is the nostalgist, trying to bring us back to a time in the church that has passed, that of the 60s.
Thank you both for joining me on UpFront here in the arena. We'll have to leave it there. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.